Warning, this episode may contain disturbing content, soothing narration, and mild existential dread. Basically, murder ASMR for stressed professionals. Listener discretion is advised. Hell, it might be necessary.
In 1931, 16 girls, children really, faced charges of arson. Arson, which in North Carolina was a capital crime. 16 teenagers staring down the possibility of death row. It's mind-boggling to think about today, but here's the thing. It was mind-boggling then, too. North Carolina didn't have an easy answer for what to do with the girls from Samarcand. Execute them and face national outrage? Send children to prison? Send them back to the very reform school whose abuses had sparked the fires? There were no good options because Samarcand itself was the problem. And the press wasn't shying away from the sensational headlines about the horrors happening inside those walls. Public sentiment shifted fast, from outrage over the crimes to outrage over what society had allowed to happen to those girls right under their noses. This wasn't just a trial about arson. It wasn't even a trial about juvenile justice. In the public eye, North Carolina was on trial. Reform schools were on trial. Gender disparities were on trial. Morality was on trial. Eugenics was on trial. But for 16 girls, it was their futures hanging in the balance, and they had no idea how enormous the firestorm they'd started really was. And they weren't finished. Before the judge's gavel ever cracked through that heavy courtroom silence, the Samarcand 16 would strike the match again. And I have to say, it's the most delightful comedic anarchy I've ever had the privilege of sharing with you. So let's return to 1931, where 16 children sat in jail cells charged with arson. 16 children shaped by poverty, abuse, and trauma. 16 children who lit fires as a desperate cry for help. And a community poised to implode over what would happen next. This is the Sweet 16 of Samarcand right here on Crime to Burn. Welcome to Crime to Burn, where we explore the dark, sooty landscape where true crime intersects with arson and criminal negligence. Join us as we sift through the ashes to bring you the story of what really happened. Welcome back to Crime to Burn. I'm April, a fire protection engineer, former firefighter, and the bewildered narrator of what might be the most spectacularly chaotic moment ever committed on this podcast.
And I'm not normally an anarchist, but in this case I might make an exception.
We're so happy to have you join us. Last week I made an impassioned plea for your help with ratings and reviews on Apple and Spotify. And to Paper Swimmer and Callie1982, who both left Apple reviews, we salute you. Truly, we cannot thank you enough for taking the time to do that. A few more of you left star ratings without written reviews, and while I can't see who you are, I've personally asked Steve to bless you with all the best snacks, the sacred snacks, the crunchy ones.
And Steve has heard you.
We've still got a long climb ahead of us to get traction on those platforms. We have 59 ratings on Apple and 59 on Spotify, which is amazing. But like I said, over 4,500 of you tune in each month, so we desperately need each of you to click on those 5 stars. Don't know how to leave a rating? Email me. I will literally walk you through it step by step. That's how much I love you. I will hold your hand, virtually. Warm palm, light pressure.
Little stroking of the thumb.
I've also been slacking on social media because life has been absolute chaos, but still, go follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, X, and YouTube. I will try to get my act together, but your likes, follows, shares, and comments help us find our audience in the algorithmic wasteland. Check the link in the show notes for your Crime to Burn merch. We really like it when our logo touches your skin, and we think you will too. I'd make a sexy roar here, but my sexy kitten noise always sounds like I'm choking on a hairball, so you'll just have to imagine it.
Grr.
And please welcome our newest Patreon member, Louisa Liebner. Steve has officially activated your Steve gland, and we'll be sending you some stickers shortly. Thank you so much for joining us. Your support means the world, because right now this podcast is still a financial black hole. I have approximately $1,500 worth of court records I need to purchase for an explosive upcoming series, and y'all, this show doesn't even pay for its own hosting fees yet. So if it's financially feasible for you, click the link in the show notes and join us over on Patreon. Your support helps keep the fires lit, metaphorically, legally, and spiritually. And last but not least, email us your fire stories, case suggestions, feedback, and unhinged commentary to crimetoburn@gmail.com. Last week we did some heavy lifting, diving into the fire at Samarcand Girls Reformatory in the Sandhills of North Carolina, where 16 girls allegedly confessed to setting, helping set, or at least enthusiastically planning the fires that torched 2 dormitories. A place we now know was less reform school and more state-sanctioned trauma warehouse, complete with bedbugs, cockroaches, and about all the charm of a crime scene. And while we know what happened, the girls set fires out of desperation over their mistreatment under the false impression that truly uncontrollable girls would be sent home. The bigger story is why it happened. And we dug into America's dark history regarding eugenics, morality, and gender disparities, where sexually curious boys were encouraged to straighten up, while girls were confined to abuse factories and often sterilized against their will. There was a lot of dark in that episode, and today we're going absolutely feral, because the fires that burned at Samarcand were just the opening act. And Scene 2 is going to leave your jaw on the floor, so buckle up, because here we go. When we left off, 16 girls were divided among 4 jail cells in Carthage, North Carolina, which, if you're doing the math, is all the cells. The entire jail, there was no vacancy. This left the county with a bit of a logistical nightmare, because you cannot exactly tuck teenage girls in with, say, your average Saturday night drunk tank regular and call it a day. But never fear, North Carolina's correctional system apparently had an outstanding concierge service. And 9 of the girls were whisked off to the jail in Lumberton. Fresh accommodations, new scenery, same level of supervision. And the press. Oh, the press was absolutely clamoring over the girls. They were instant celebrities. And because they were such curiosities to the press, they felt their rebelliousness was what got them this newfound celebrity status and new accommodations without the threat of whippings, so they leaned in hard. One girl told the press that she was the mastermind of the entire plan. She explained, cheerfully, mind you, that the whole point was to force the institution's hand, either send her home or ship her off to a school where the conditions weren't straight out of a Dickinson horror anthology. And she boasted, without a single hint of regret, that she would absolutely repeat the whole thing again. Her court-appointed lawyer probably went fully apoplectic, like clutching his chest, seeing his career flash before his eyes apoplectic. In fact, the court appointed one lawyer to represent all of the girls. One. A man who, upon receiving this assignment, probably stared out a window and reconsidered every life choice he had ever made that led him to this moment. But then a woman named Nell Lewis wrote to him. She'd been covering social issues for the newspaper, and she was deeply invested in the Samarcand story, and, minor detail, she happened to have a law degree and had passed the North Carolina bar. She was very inexperienced, but she had gumption, righteous fury, and the kind of moral backbone that gets you labeled as difficult by the wrong men. And she offered to help. And this man, bless his exhausted, overwhelmed heart, didn't just accept it. He practically launched the reins into her hands, saying, "Great, you take the lead and I'll be your assistant," which is an absolutely breathtaking display of self-preservation to hand off a case with career suicide written all over it. Who says chivalry is dead? And while Nell got to work arranging psychological evaluations, digging into the girls' backgrounds, and peeling back the layers of atrocity that passed for education at Samarcand, the girls started to feel forgotten. The press wasn't clamoring for interviews anymore. The excitement had died down, and these girls had gone their entire lives without the one thing that most children get in abundance: healthy attention. And when the spotlight dimmed, they didn't adapt. They escalated. If they couldn't get validation from the newspapers, they would get it from the nearest adult authority figure. Unfortunately for him, that was the jailer in Lumberton, a man named Mr. Austin Smith. Now, according to reporters, Smith had taken on something of a fatherly role with the 9 girls under his watch, and the girls adored him so much that they told the press they'd like to stay in the Lumberton jail forever as long as Mr. Smith was their keeper. Sweet, right?
No, that's terrifying.
Well, until reality kicked in. Because Smith's job involved more than catering to the whims of 9 teenage arson defendants. And when the girls felt like his attention was spreading too thin, they did what they'd always done when the world ignored them. They raised absolute hell. On April 22nd, the girls had had enough. Smith hadn't come to let them out of the cells when they expected, so they began banging whatever objects they could find against the bars, demanding his attention. And Smith ignored them because, frankly, he was exhausted. For 6 solid weeks, the girls had him jumping through hoops, fetching them matches, cigarettes, magazines, newspapers, and hair ribbons. And yes, you heard that correctly. Matches, newspapers, cigarettes, given to 9 girls that were awaiting arson charges. Jail in 1931 was an entirely different ecosystem, because in what universe do you hand a pack of matches to children accused of setting 2 dormitories on fire? As we're about to find out, it goes exactly the way you think it does. And let's not overlook the fact that in 1931, children were permitted to smoke. That is absolutely wild to me. So feeling neglected and forgotten, the girls decided that they knew exactly how to get out of their cells. Remember those newspapers the jail so helpfully provided? Yeah, they stuffed them under their mattresses and lit them on fire. Jailer Smith hears screams of fire and comes running to find smoke rolling out of the cells and the 9 kids locked inside, so he panics, understandably, unlocks the cells to save them, and now he's got a real problem. 9 newly freed arson defendants and 1 very active fire. He doesn't have time to march them to whatever passed for the recreation area in 1931. He has burning mattresses to contend with. So he releases them into the hallway to buy himself time. And the girls immediately realize the universe has handed them a golden opportunity. A rare, glittering, chaos-shaped opportunity. And they take it. They go feral. They start tearing through the jail like a tornado made entirely of teenage hormones and righteous indignation. They throw chairs at windows, shattering them. They flip tables. They rifle through office drawers. They collect pens, pencils, and incredibly, pocket knives. Meanwhile, poor Smith is in the cell beating at those burning mattresses with blankets trying to put them out. And by some miracle, he finally gets the fire out, and now he faces an even bigger crisis. A single jailer with a jail full of screaming teenagers who outnumber him 9-1. And these girls have now tasted freedom. They are not going back quietly. So for several hours, Jailer Smith tries to corner them one at a time and reason with them to go back into their cells. You see, the jail had no alarm system, apparently no radios, and there was no backup. Nobody outside the building has any idea what's happening inside. So when he approaches, they take broken glass from the shattered windows and the pocket knives they've liberated, and they start jabbing in the air in front of him, threatening to stab him if he gets too close. Eventually, he does manage to call for help, and help arrives in the form of the sheriff and several deputies. But now the deputies are facing 9 armed girls hopped up on adrenaline and chaotic revenge. And this part is where the gender expectations of 1931 absolutely derailed law enforcement's day. According to reporters and the book that I used for this episode, these men had been trained that you do not physically restrain women. Women were to be treated gently and with respect. So these grown men, trained officers of the law, basically stepped aside and decided to let the girls just get it out of their system until they're exhausted. They stood back and let them run rampant through the jail, thinking that eventually they'd just tire themselves out and then what? Just fall asleep from exhaustion? But eventually they had to admit that these girls had far more energy than the men had patience. Hours into this riot, with broken furniture, destroyed windows, knives flashing, and the girls still going strong, the sheriff finally gives the order to physically restrain them. Deputies began bodily dragging them back to their cells one by one. But let the record show, 9 girls, 1 exhausted jailer, and nearly an entire sheriff's department were held hostage for hours by pure teenage chaos. The lawyer for the girls, well, she was displeased. This did not make her job of presenting these girls as poor, abused, and harmless children very easy to sell. But her job was about to get a whole lot harder than she ever imagined. Because while Lumberton was still rebuilding its dignity, the Carthage jail was about to implode. A.W. Lambert and his wife were in charge of the 7 girls held there, and they expected no trouble. They fed the girls well, they let them listen to records on the Victrola, they treated them kindly, and the girls behaved until April 30th, just 8 days after the Lumberton riot. One of the inmates had a medical emergency, and during the commotion, the rest of the girls got restless. They had not been let out of their cells for the day, and they were feeling stir-crazy. They began yelling for the jailer and his wife. By 4 p.m., when no one responded, they felt forgotten, punished, and confused, because as far as they knew, they'd actually been behaving. And because 1931 jail protocols were apparently written by a pyromaniac, they had magazines, cigarettes, and matches, all graciously provided by the jailer. So 8 of the 9 girls decided they needed to take drastic measures. Only one refused to participate. They stuffed their magazine pages under 2 cots and lit them on fire and began screaming. Lambert rushes in, releases the girls to fight the fire, and it's too big for him to fight by himself, so he has to go call the fire department. And the girls, seeing their opportunity, said, "Lumberton did it, we can do it better." And they went full sequel, bigger budget, more stunts, no supervision. They shattered windows, they broke furniture, they hung out of the windows, screaming vulgarities at the people on the street, and a crowd gathered like it was the hottest ticket in town. Soon the jail was full of firemen and sheriff's deputies and smoke and chaos and 7 teenage girls with wild hair, wild eyes, and absolutely vibrating with rage and adrenaline. They got the fire out and the fire department left. The girls were still not back in their cells, but soon the firemen were called back because the girls had started a second fire. And of course, because the universe wanted this to be a comedy, the girls had rifled through a drawer containing the personal belongings of former inmates and found several pocket knives. The newspapers breathlessly reported that they cornered a firefighter and slashed him to ribbons. The firefighter clarified that he was only verbally assaulted and the cut on his arm came from a shard of glass from a window that he broke himself while trying to fight the fire. But rumors always travel faster when teenage girls are involved. Finally, in pure desperation, after failing to control the girls for hours, the sheriff gave the order for the fire department to do the unthinkable, to turn the hoses on the girls.
Why is this? This is a recurring. Why do firefighters agree to get involved with these things?
I don't know.
Don't waste the resources of the water and the people, and stop hosing people down for cops. It's ridiculous.
Afterward, the sheriff told reporters that these girls aren't vicious. They don't really want to harm anyone. Setting the fires was just a prank with them, and of course, if they were men, we would know how to deal with them, but we just can't be rough with girls. We have to be firm and kind.
Well, I don't disagree.
I don't either. But in 1931 North Carolina, 2 sets of teenage girls in 2 separate jails held 2 sheriff's departments and a whole crew of firefighters hostage through an hours-long riot. There were multiple fires, broken windows, furniture carnage, threats with knives and glass shards, and hoses used as crowd control. And not a single person seemed to know how to handle 16 fed-up teenage girls with matches. So while the girls were staging the great jailhouse double feature of chaos, their lawyer was having a very different kind of meltdown. Nell Lewis had walked into this case ready to fight a righteous battle, and her plan was simple. She just had to show the world that these girls were misunderstood, abused, neglected children who needed protection and not punishment. But that narrative? It was being set on fire faster than a Samarcand dormitory because public sentiment split clean down the middle after the riots. One camp looked at the fires and the knives and the screaming and broken windows and said, "See, they're monsters. They're beyond reform." They believed that these girls were too far gone, criminals forged in their own wickedness, not by their circumstances. People who had never known a day of deprivation suddenly became experts on incorrigibility. But the other camp, the one Nell desperately was counting on, saw something else. They saw children shaped by poverty, trauma, and neglect. Children who had never been given stability, education, guidance, support, or the basic dignity of being loved. Children who had survived beatings, hunger, exploitation, abandonment, and then were told their rebellion meant that they deserved more of it. To those people, the fires weren't proof of evil, they were proof of despair. Meanwhile, the families of the Samarcand girls were bewildered and overwhelmed. Most of them were barely literate. Many of them did not understand the legal system at all. They did not grasp the enormity of the charges that their daughters were facing, death by the electric chair. So they wrote letters, not legal arguments, not defenses, just simple pleading notes. "Please, send my girl home." They didn't understand that the judge's hands were tied. They didn't understand that arson wasn't a naughty prank, but a capital offense, and they didn't understand that the state wasn't playing. And some of the girls didn't even have families to write those letters. Some were orphans. Some families were estranged from them, and some had families who simply did not want them back. These were children who had been rejected long before they ever lit a match. So Nell stood there, watching her defense strategy unravel in real time, watching her clients, those girls that she genuinely wanted to protect, accidentally torch their own public sympathy with the same enthusiasm they torched jailhouse mattresses. She was ready to walk into court arguing that they were victims of abuse, but instead, thanks to 2 jail riots and a mountain of bad press, she was forced to pivot to, listen, yes, they lit everything on fire twice. And yes, they held an entire sheriff's department hostage, but... And that is the impossible battlefield she walked into, because the truth was this. Every horrific thing the girls did was a direct product of the horrific things done to them. The world just wasn't ready to hear it. So let's talk about the charges. Now, no prosecutor wanted to be the one to send children to the electric chair. But in 1931, if these girls were convicted of first-degree arson, that was exactly what the law allowed. The statute at the time defined arson as the willful and malicious burning of the dwelling house of another, and 4 boxes had to be checked to prove the crime. 1, there had to be some burning, even slight. 2, it had to be a dwelling or an outbuilding attached to one. 3, it had to belong to someone else, or at least be occupied by someone else. And 4, it had to be done maliciously. Simple and brutal, and deadly if you were a teenage girl caught in the wrong system. But before the trial even started, the case cracked a little. 2 of the 16 were released from charges entirely, Mary Lee Bronson and Wilma Owens. Neither girl had confessed, and no witnesses placed them at the fires, and the state had no evidence. So now we're down to 14. Now, Mary Lee Bronson was sent home with her parents, but Wilma was an orphan. And the court had absolutely no idea what to do with her. Sent her back to Samarcand? Nobody wanted that, not the judge, not the attorneys, and certainly not Wilma. So the judge turned to Nell Lewis, her attorney, the brand new lawyer who had just agreed to represent all the girls, and casually dropped a bombshell. I'm placing Wilma in your custody. Nell stared back at him like he just handed her a live grenade. She was unmarried, childless, living alone, barely launched into her legal career, and suddenly she was being voluntold to take home a traumatized teenager accused of arson. She protested, understandably. "Judge, I don't know what to do with her." And he snapped back in open court. "Multiply your problem by 16 and you'll have a concept of what I'm dealing with." Can you imagine going to work one morning and someone just assigns you a child? Surprise, you're a parent now, no handbook included.
I quit.
But that was just the opening act, because the real legal battle began. Lawyers for the girls argued that Samarcand wasn't a house, it was a school, a state institution, a facility, and not a private residence. And North Carolina had a very different statute for that. It said, if any person shall willfully set fire to any schoolhouse, he shall be guilty of a felony and punished by imprisonment. Not the death penalty, not the electric chair, just prison time. So Lewis pushed hard for the fire to be charged under the schoolhouse statute, and the prosecutor eventually agreed, but only on one condition. All 14 remaining girls had to plead guilty. So they did, which meant one trial, one proceeding, and one decision maker. There was no jury, just a single judge holding the fate of 14 girls whose lives had already been shaped by poverty, trauma, and abuse. So Lewis was prepared to show him everything. The girls being hunted down with bloodhounds when they ran away, beatings so severe that they sent children to the infirmary, bed bugs, sickness, and starvation-level diets, punishments that crossed into torture, and a system designed to reform by breaking them. She had witness statements, she had former staff that were willing to talk, and she had receipts, literally and figuratively. And then, right as the trial began, the judge dealt her a devastating blow. The prosecutor argued that only evidence of cruelty that happened directly to the defendants themselves should be admissible. She couldn't present the systemic abuse, the conditions that other girls had endured. She couldn't present a pattern and a culture, not the full picture of Samarcand's brutality. And the judge agreed. In one ruling, he wiped out the vast majority of Lewis's evidence, and her argument wasn't silenced, but it was muzzled. She was being asked to tell the story of why these girls lit the fires without being allowed to explain what the tinder was, and that ruling would shape everything that happened next. Now, I have a suspicion about why the judge made that ruling. This case wasn't happening in a quiet little courtroom with nobody watching. This was happening under the full blinding spotlight of the North Carolina press, which at the time was obsessed with the story. It was front-page news, and people were following it like a serialized novel. And the press had been hammering Samarcand for weeks, revealing cruelty, neglect, and outright brutality. And if all that was true, it didn't just make Samarcand look bad, it made the state look bad. The same state prosecuting the girls, the same state running the quote-unquote school. the same state signing the judge's paychecks. So was it a coincidence that the judge restricted testimony only to the abuse experienced directly by the 14 girls on trial? Maybe. But here's the thing about limiting evidence. It's an excellent public relations shield. If only the defendants themselves can testify to cruelty, the state can position them as disgruntled troublemakers and untrustworthy teenagers, girls with behavioral problems, the usual misogynistic 1931 toolkit. But if other girls, uninvolved girls and former residents and staff and teachers took the stand and described beatings, whippings, starvation diets, medical neglect, bedbug infestations, and bloodhounds being unleashed on children, well, that paints an entirely different picture. That turns the courtroom and the trial of the Samarcand girls into a trial about Samarcand. And that was a picture the state of North Carolina absolutely did not want the nation to see. Not in 1931, not during an era of moral posturing and purity campaigns, and not while reform schools were already falling under scrutiny. So whether the judge intended it or not, his ruling conveniently protected the reputation of the institution and the government far more effectively than it protected the truth. And that left Nell Lewis walking into court with her hands tied behind her back, trying to prove a fire started long before the matches were struck. Now, with all 14 girls having pled guilty, the trial phase was over, but the story was far from finished, because what came next wasn't a question of guilt, it was the question of what to do with them. Under the statute by which they were charged, each girl faced up to 5 years in prison, and the judge also had the option of giving them suspended sentences, meaning they would walk free unless they got into further trouble. On paper, that sounds merciful, but here was the problem. Where exactly were they supposed to go? They couldn't go back to Samarcand. Everyone agreed that would be like throwing them back into the fire that forged them. And many of them could not go back to their families because those families were either unsafe, unwilling, or completely non-existent. So the judge wasn't just weighing punishment, he was also weighing public safety, child welfare, and the future of 14 traumatized teenagers who had already proven that they would burn down a building rather than be abused again. Even if he believed, as Nell Lewis argued, that these girls were just products of their brutal environment, even if he believed they were reacting out of desperation and not true malice, there was still the question he could not escape. If I set them free, what happens next? Because trauma doesn't evaporate when the courtroom empties. And the rage, fear, and survival instincts that drove these girls to arson were not magically resolved just because they stood in nice dresses in front of a judge. And if he sent them out into the world without structure or treatment, was he giving them a chance at freedom? Or was he unleashing 14 volatile, wounded children into a society that had never protected them? There was no good option, no morally clean answer. This was the definition of an impossible decision. And the judge knew whatever he chose, North Carolina and the entire country would be watching. When the judge returned to the bench to hand down the sentences, the room held its breath. He began with the two youngest, Rosa Mull and Margaret Pridgeon, both just children, small enough that the gravity of the courtroom seemed to swallow them whole. For them, he chose mercy, suspended sentences. Rosa was sent home to her family. Margaret was sent back to her father. 2 girls spared prison. But then the judge looked at the remaining 12 teenagers who had survived poverty, abandonment, beatings, and systemic cruelty, and had responded with the only rebellion available to them. And he sentenced every single one of them to prison, 18 months to 5 years, depending on good behavior. 18 months was the promise that dangled in front of them, the carrot on a string. Behave and you walk out early. But here's the thing, every one of these girls had already learned the hard way that good behavior had never saved them before. Not at home, not at Samarcand, and not in any system that had ever touched them. And that promise turned out to be exactly as hollow as the ones they'd been raised on. Because not a single girl was released early, not one. All 12 served the full 5 years. 5 years in the North Carolina State Penitentiary, housed in the cell block just above death row. Children locked away as adults. Children punished more harshly than the men whose violence society had always excused. Children forgotten as soon as the headlines faded. And here's the true tragedy. Of the original Samarcand 16, we only know what became of 2 of the girls. One died by suicide. Another married later in life and wanted desperately to become a mother. but never could. The rest, they disappeared into the fog of history. Forgotten names, forgotten childhoods. Children sacrificed to a system that had no mechanism, none, for treating them fairly. And that's ultimately what the Samarcand 16 became. Not fire starters and not criminals, but the spark that ignited a movement for reform. They forced the public to open its eyes. They made people talk. They made lawmakers uncomfortable. And yes, eventually reforms trickled in. But we're fooling ourselves if we pretend the work is finished, because we are still punishing children without love. We are still funneling men and women into systems built for control and not compassion. And punishment without love has never, not once, produced rehabilitation. So here's the impossible question. What are we doing right now to stop it? I sit behind this microphone and tell you these stories to pull back the veil, to show the human costs hidden behind the headlines. But people, humans, children, are still falling through the cracks every single day. They're still being chewed up by a system designed for confinement instead of care, legality instead of empathy, and restraint instead of restoration. Our justice system is not healed. And the truth is, justice today is not that different from what those girls faced in 1931. Innocent people are still being locked away. We still hold one moral measuring stick to every person without ever asking what shaped them. We recoil at the horrors of eugenics, but we quietly accept a prison system that fails over and over again in the same familiar ways. Samarcand didn't close after the trial, but it did change. Under orders from the governor and a state investigation, corporal punishment was outlawed in North Carolina's reform schools. Starvation diets were banned. And with new leadership, Samarcand rebuilt itself into a place later praised for its empathy and order. But was that the truth, or just a fresh coat of paint on the public-facing walls? Only the girls who lived there would ever really know. What didn't change quickly was the shadow behind it. North Carolina's eugenics program continued until 1977. By then, more than 7,600 people had been sterilized, many without consent, and some without even being told. Most of them were either black women or impoverished white girls. So the Samarcand 16 were not just a headline, they were a ripple, one that's still spreading and still forcing us to look into the dark corners of our system and ask where they're still broken and what we're willing to demand better for. Samarcand finally closed its doors in 2011, but the horrors and the questions our justice system raises, those are still very much alive. Does the convenience of embracing our perceived helplessness to change the system make us complicit? Tell us what you think in the comments. This has been the story of the Sweet 16 of Samarcand, right here on Crime to Burn.
I'm not sure what I was thinking. I was told this would be a morale-boosting experience. That was a lie. It's hard to know what you were thinking when you write things.
I know what I was thinking when I wrote until 4 o'clock this morning.
Big old titties.
Basically, yeah.
I don't know, man. Might have oversold that one. Oh, if it doesn't hurt me, I'm going to love it. Cranial oscillation. Always aim your air freshener in a safe direction. Be responsible.
One of these days, you guys are gonna die laughing.
This episode is brought to you by laughter and deep regret.
We got gunshots and children laughing, which normally don't go together.
Well, that's oddly a couple of my favorite sounds.
We've got gunshots and children laughing and kitten zoomies and...
These are a few of my favorite things. Wow, what's the word for four?
4?
I said few because we had 3.
Oh.
These are a quad representation of my favorite.
I don't think we're going to be able to record.
This is chaotic.
They went to a larger caliber. Students were like, oh, we can record through that.
We should just go join them.
We should. We'd like to apologize now for the gunshots in the background, but we like our true crime to sound realistic.
But that's not a crime. That's freedom. I'm afraid that ASMR means mouth or something, and I'm going to fuck it up. Like, I'm terrified to use acronyms anymore.
When I was out in the online dating world, a lot of people would put 420 in their profiles as like a code to say,
We eat salad.
we eat salad. And I was very young and naive and innocent and was not interested in anyone that ate salad. So this guy
You were not vegan friendly.
this guy messaged me, and I read his profile, and I replied, and I was like, I'm sorry. His profile, was living in Atlanta, and at the time, I didn't know this, but people in the perimeter would put 404 in their profiles to indicate that they're inside the perimeter and, geographically more desirable to people in town.
You did something akin to claiming gang territory, maybe.
So I wrote back
You
to
said you were not 404 friendly.
That is exactly what I said.
You can't come in my neighborhood, bitch. No, we don't respect people from your area code.
He was like, what are you talking about?
You about to cross a motherfucking line. That's on the paper.
He was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, doesn't that mean do you eat salad? And he was like, no, it's the area code. And I blocked him. I was too embarrassed.
And you've never driven through a 404 area code since. Your 20s and mine were just vastly different.
Anyway, I blocked him because I was too embarrassed. I couldn't, every time he messaged me, my face would just burn. So I was like, sorry, this isn't going to work.
Sometimes you just have to run away.
You do. Like the time I hit my professor in the face with a condom.
Like that.
Yeah, I ran straight to the computer lab and dropped the class.
I must have done it before.
Hit somebody in the face with a condom?
No, ran away from a situation like,
I'm trying to think of what other situations I've run away from.
Any kind of responsibility, emotional involvement, obligation. That's okay.
Do you want to snuggle my kitten? I actually didn't mean that as innuendo, but after I heard it, I hear how it sounds. All right, well, that's it for Crime to Burn today. We've not.
We mentioned no crimes.
We did not get anywhere. That's what happens when you live in freedom, is that other people's freedom is going to occasionally impede your recording schedule, and that's okay. You just be flexible. Got to sniff all the places first. See which one has the right smell. Jesus, when he came in last night with that animal skin, I thought it was a dead squirrel, or possibly a not all the way dead squirrel.
You didn't think that was dead. By the way, you hollered out, "Help me."
Well, he came up the stairs and I was like, what have you? Oh my God, it's an animal. And I was backed against the front door and I just yelled, help me, help me, help me, help me.
You sure did. I came and snatched up something, not knowing what it was. Just gotta get a hold of this thing. Oh, that thing was gross.
He was very proud. He dropped it like, look, Mom, I got this for you.
It's really nice.
I don't think that he was expecting my reaction.
Here's a partial deer pelt.
Gross.
I've never seen a romance novel start out and standardized testing was... I didn't say I hate it. I'm just not accustomed to it. From all my experience reading romance novels. I have no idea how it's supposed to go. I don't have a clue.
I still feel like I'm out of breath. Oh, and I had to burp.
Look like you had a little extra breath.
It's in the wrong hole.
I hate when that happens.
Court.
Never make that sound again.
Her court appointed... Why can't I say court? Court.
There's no Q.
Her court.
Attention citizens. You are not safe. Your jails are not safe. Your fire escapes are not safe. Your emotional stability is especially not safe. Because if history has taught us anything, it's this. A sufficiently pissed off teenage girl can overthrow a minor government using nothing but spite, a hair ribbon, and the collected force of generational trauma. If you see a pissed off teenager approaching, do not make eye contact. They can smell confidence and will treat it as a threat.
This episode's brought to you by Freedom Seeds, interrupting recording sessions in the name of liberty since yesterday.
I feel like that jailer that was fighting them girls off, he didn't even try a spray bottle full of water.
I don't think he did. They went straight to fire hoses.
Well, that's the show. Stay safe, stay sharp, and keep your receipts. We're done here. Tip your bartender and question authority.
Crime to Burn is a production of Crime to Burn, LLC, where we light fires in your brain and not your buildings. All rights reserved. Still spiritually parched after this episode? It's okay, Steve believes in cross-pollination. Here's a trailer for a show we think deserves to infiltrate your ear holes, in a good way. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review before you go. Steve is watching.
Hi everyone, we are the hosts of Like Mother, Like Murder, a true crime momcast.
You heard that right. We are a mom cast, which is our unique twist in the true crime world.
What sets us aside is that our content is mainly mom related, from missing moms to murdered moms,
To moms who committed the crime, survivors, and more.
We are getting started on our 3rd season with over 100 episodes that you guys can go and binge. I am Rachel.
And I'm Heather. We drop new episodes every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts, at Like Mother,
Like Murder.